Hello, everybody. Welcome today in the next Frogeex Greentech live sessions today. It's my great pleasure to welcome again in our round Mr. Rafael Schranz. He's a circular economy specialist and has been with us also for other sessions regarding waste management circularity. And let me also give you a little brief on the topic today. So we will be talking about plastic and recycling. Essentially, one of the hot topics currently, there is some challenges with recycling. Rafael is going to share with us some observations, some research from his side. I mean, he's working quite heavily in the field of waste management, waste prevention, circularity, business models, etc. So really looking forward to, share his perspective on the topic, on this challenge. And apparently we have some space for Q&A for people, entrepreneurs, business owners that are in this field, that are, for example, working with packaging. Apparently packaging is also a hot element for plastic application. Many times, massive utility, but there are also side effects of applying this material and in masses in scale. So this is also a little bit what we need to consider. So Rafael, with this, welcome in this round.
Thank you very much, Jana, for that kind introduction, and nice to be back again. I think too. Really looking forward to the discussion, and just a short introduction from myself. So I'm Rafael Schranz. I'm working as a self-employed circular economy specialist. Basically, what I'm doing for the audience who is listening, basically I'm providing high-level trainings on circular economy to basically ramp up education in the circular economy and raise awareness about different topics, sustainability topics, circular energy systems, circular product design, circular resource flows and technical and biological cycles, circular business models and how they can be implemented to achieve cost reductions, but also emission reductions. The second thing that I'm doing is basically provide mapping services to visualize resource flows, basically, or in other words, to identify linear structures in current production and consumption systems, and basically identify systemic leakage. So where materials, water or energy basically leak out of the system. And with that mapping process, I'm basically helping companies and organizations and institutions basically to strategize and to strategy plan and to future-proof basically their sustainability strategy, circular economy strategy for the future, providing them with ongoing research that I'm doing, to make it possible for the seamless transition from linear to more circular, sustainable, and regenerative business operations. So really looking forward to today's discussion on this very important topic.
Yeah. Everybody loves and loves not plastic. I would say it's a very polarizing topic. You always get a lot of feedback on that. So would you like to take the opportunity to share with us a little bit your observations, brief us on the status? We know there is very little plastic, even after an extensive period of time. We work now with recycling for 30 years or something, and there is still around 99% of plastics being recycled. There is rising concern in terms of toxicity of the recycled plastics that are being recirculated, especially for the food and beverage industry. May be interesting to note and to take note of that for the production processes, for the regulation, for the compliance, for the health and safety impacts of their products. Quite maybe something interesting to consider. So what is your take on that? What is something that you would like to share with us? Just a kind of brief intro.
Great points for that introduction. So let me just pull some statistics and some data points for the start of this conversation. It's when we look at plastics, it's very versatile, right? So plastics is basically everywhere. We're using it for various industries. We're using it for a lot of different things, as for example packaging is a big one, right? So it basically has found its applications in various industries all around the globe, right? So versatile. It's very versatile. It's transformative. It really has changed on how business is actually conducted and how things are packaged all around the globe. So it basically has transformed a lot of different industries. It, of course, to frame the discussion a little bit today, it faces a complex reality, right? When it comes to really if it can achieve full circularity. So let's dive into some numbers at first. So in 1950, basically what we did was we created 2 million tons of plastic a year. Right? So the plastic production of 2 million tons a year, well, that's manageable. In 2015, when the last research study was done, this was done by the University of Georgia, the University of California, and Santa Barbara, and also the Sea Education Association. They found that by 2015, that humans had created 8.3 billion tons of plastics. So this plastic production more than 200. This is more than 200-fold increase in global plastic production, right? That's a massive increase. It's an exponential curve that is getting steeper and steeper and steeper. Out of that, 8.3 billion metric tons of plastics that were produced globally when the research study was done in 2015, 6.3 billion tons had already become waste, right? So of that waste, as you have already mentioned, perfectly accurate, only 9% was recycled. 12% was incinerated, and about 79% accumulated in landfills or the natural environment. So landfills or water bodies or forests or other environmental regions. This is massive, and this is, from my perspective, this is one of the indicators why we cannot say that, and I have to make this very clear, why we cannot say that recycling is synonymous for a circular economy. This is a very important thing. Recycling does not equal the circular economy. Why is that? The key challenges that we currently see in the plastic production and the plastic consumption in general, and how we're actually dealing with these plastic types, is that there are many types. There's a vast array of plastic types and different compositions to make universal recycling very, very difficult, right? Because there are thousands of plastic types, each with their own characteristics, on composition, to meet specific demands of different industries. And of course, if you have these different material complexities in one product or one material stream, then basically this hampers seamless material recovery, right? Because we simply don't have reintegration methods or recycling methods for thousands and thousands of different plastic compositions. So this is the first thing. Contaminated streams is another one. So when all of these waste streams are basically mixed, what the problem that exists is you have cross contamination, right? So for example, with food residue, with different additives, with materials, with biological flows that are mixed with plastic types, for example, and other materials that also hinder this recycling process, because you have to sort it, you have to clean it, you have to cut it. This also requires labor, this requires energy. So this is another important point to mention. And of course, when we really talk about, and this is a very important point, when we really talk about recycling, what we really mean is downcycling, right? Because if you're recycling, or in that case, if you're downcycling a plastic bottle, these plastics, they lose quality and they lose material with each cycle. So this is also called the reverse compound material law, but this is a very technical thing to say. You basically lose half of the material when you are melting plastics, right? If you're melting it twice, then basically you're only left with 25% of the material. If you're melting it for a third time, you're basically left with the 12.5% of the material. So you basically need 2 bottles of plastics to basically produce a new one. So this is also a very important thing to mention, right? This is not a recycling in the sense that we're talking about it. It's actually a downcycling, because you're actually losing value and losing material. This is a very important thing to mention. Another thing, and this is of course a global problem, and I don't really think that we have currently seen the effects of it. It's a field that has been researched in the last years, but we have not really seen the global implications of it. Is microplastics. So with the recycling process, there's a lot of microplastics that is created now, or should I say downcycling process of plastics. There's a lot of microplastics created. These microplastics are often in a very, they're often very small, almost invisible to the naked eye. They infiltrate ecosystems, the terrestrial biosphere. They Microplastics, it harms life basically in every terrestrial environmental ecosystem, such as water, land, air, and this also complicates recovery, right? Because if that distributes into the environment, you cannot really collect microplastics because it's so small, right? We don't have collection systems for microplastics. We have some research that is going into cleaning microplastics from water bodies, for example, but this is a massive problem in my opinion. I really have to state this very clearly. I even read an article lately where they have found microplastics in a human heart during surgery. They have found microplastics in the blood of a patient, for example. So this is a real big problem. And that's why I'm not really a fan of plastic recycling or the companies who say, well, recycling, and we're recycling all of these bottles and therefore we are participating in the circular economy. No, they don't. Recycling is not synonymous for the circular economy, and actually recycling or downcycling in that regard is actually the least desirable option, right? Because when I can visualize that, for example, just to give you a little bit of an introduction here. Let me just share the screen. Okay, I think you can see that now. So the circular economy framework, as proposed by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, actually says also that the recycling is actually the least desirable option, right? Because this cycle is very long. So, for example, what you need to do for recycling is you basically also have to introduce energy into the system, right? You need to collect it, you need to transport it, you need to wash it, which also uses water, right? You have to cut it, which also uses energy. You have to melt it, which also uses energy. So that the energy expenditure that actually is going into the recycling is very high, right? And this is actually, that's why we're saying in a circular economy, recycling is the least desirable option, because we want to keep these loops as small as possible. And this is a very important thing. So a reuse loop will always be superior in terms of energy conservation and economic efficiency when compared to a recycling process where this cycle is very long and a lot of stakeholders are involved. Okay, this is just a little bit of an illustration, but yeah, in general, there are certain things that we can achieve or that we can do in the plastics industry. For example, implementing circular business models for plastics, or even provide plastics as a service, reduce overall plastic consumption. So there are different things that we can do, but from my perspective, it is a pretty big problem that we have to find alternatives. For example, alternatives in the circular economy with packaging, for example, would be different materials, where we basically base these material compositions in terms of biological resources. For example, mycelium packaging, for example, algae packaging, seaweed that can actually biodegrade, for example. So these different biological materials are actually, in my opinion, and also this relates to the circular bioeconomy for the future, but these materials are very promising. And again, to sum up, from my perspective, there are a lot of a lot of problems in regards to this recycling process or the downcycling process of plastics, for example. It's also the case that a lot of plastic producers and beverage companies, for example, they shift their liability and shift their responsibility to other stakeholders. They shift it to wholesalers and basically write on their bottles, for example, recycle me, right? Because they won't do it, right? So anyone else has to do it. So it from my perspective, it's a pretty big problem, and happy to go into that. So let's have a little bit of a talk about that and open to questions.
Looking for the unmute button over here. Thank you so much, Rafael, for sharing this. I mean, it's always a thought-provoking exchange with you. And we have a series of questions definitely that we can just go into as what you indicated. Are there any certifications or labels that are at the moment something that you would at all recommend to look at, or where would you say recommend a company, advise a company in this field having plastics in their product life cycle or in the product components or composition? What would you tell them to do? Where to start? I mean, should they certify they're sustainable? What should they do first? I mean, where is it? Where does it start? And are there any certifications that are reliable and can be applied right now?
Yes, there are a lot of different certifications. The problem with the certification is that you have to do a lot of research on that for yourself, right? Because there's also a lot of greenwashing, and a lot of people who will give out these certifications to basically say, well, this is environmentally friendly and this is produced carbon neutral. With all of the problems that I've just mentioned, I would encourage people to basically find alternatives for their plastics. So because this is not really with the problems that I've just mentioned, these are problems that are you cannot solve them by sticking to plastics, right? Because there will always be microplastics created. There will always be companies who say, well, we're in the circular economy, we're certified, somebody certified that this for us, and it's a problem. I gotta be very honest about that. So basically find alternatives, find different material streams, for example, algae or seaweed or mycelium packaging that you can easily grow, that uses a lot less water, that uses a lot less energy, and basically get certified in that, right? So that would be my recommendation for that.
Are there any segments that for which it is necessary to still continue with the application of plastics, or what is your perspective on that? What are the top users of plastic?
Well,
they should eventually stick to that because there is just no better material right now. But
yes,
we would still be able to scale down the load, the volume of the utilities. I mean,
in different industries, for example, car manufacturing, right? In airplanes, for example. I mean, these are heavy industries, right? So it's not easily doable to basically replace these things, right? But if they're using plastics, they basically have to make sure that those plastic types are standardized. Those plastic types are really accounted for. What composition it is, what how is it, what is contained in that plastic, what plastic is it, right? And then basically also provide return schemes for that, right? Or to basically reintegrate that into their own production, right? And thereby, if they're reintegrating that into their own production, they can basically really narrow the amount of primary raw materials that they're using, right? So they basically have to use a fraction of new plastics that they actually can bring into that production, use the other type of plastic as well, basically combine that and basically lower the amount of plastic that they actually need, right? It's going to take a lot of time. So for heavy industries, this is not easily doable. I would say for the packaging industry, it's definitely doable. They just have to source their materials environmentally friendly. They have to source it in a way that this is socially acceptable in terms of insurance for people, in terms of working conditions for laborers. So you actually have to look at the whole supply chain backwards, right? So where does it come from? How is it sourced? All of these things. They also have to look at, is it economically viable? Is it actually, can we grow, for example, these biological materials in that amount that we actually need it? So a lot of research has been should be done on that. And yeah, so it takes time. There's different velocities in the change of finding alternatives for different industries, but overall, I would say it is important for the future to find alternatives and to use these plastics that are already existing to basically reintegrate them, for example, into energy systems, or reintegrate them into the recycling process, and therefore limiting the amount. Oh, hey there.
Please continue. I have my kids here with me, so yeah, please. And also, just to close up on that one, looking at the process. So basically, when you mentioned components, composition, I hear a lot about life cycle assessment. Where does it come from? How can we kind of structure the processes then further? And what is the type of regulation that is applicable for people or productions, manufacturers that are using plastics in their products? What is the regulation that is applicable now in EU for them if they would like to, besides of course reaching out to you and say, hey, Rafael, we kind of need your help us to kind of develop the circularity scan or life cycle assessment or whatever is relevant. What would be the type of regulation you recommend them to look at?
The EU Plastics Directive. So there's a lot in there. Also in terms of standardization, where we basically want to provide a common framework to basically standardize these plastics, for example, because we know they're not gonna disappear overnight, right? So standardizing the labels and the EU Plastics Directive, there's a lot in there. Also in terms of reducing highly harmful chemicals in the plastics currently, reducing the amount of plastics that we're using. So this is also in line with circularity principles. For example, the slowing and the narrowing and closing of resource loops, right? So for example, we can use AI-based systems to basically provide us with a geometry of different products or packaging, where we can basically use the least amount of material with the highest mechanical stability still, right? So basically reduce the amount that we're using. So that would be a quantitative avoidance of waste, and also we can reduce through a qualitative avoidance of waste in terms of highly harmful chemicals, in terms of chemicals, or reduce the complexity of chemicals that are in there. So there are different things that we can do, but the EU Plastics Directive is a very, very important thing to look at.
Great. Now we also started because we are we have 7 more minutes left, with 2 kids around, you are counting every minute. No, just bear with us, but we are trained from COVID times still, so we can benefit from that. We talked about food and beverage, and because we mentioned now, there is this recycling, the efficiency, one topic, the end result, the material that you get and its health impacts, another topic. The release of nanoplastics continuously, regardless if you have a plastic plate or plastic cup, basically you still release the microplastics, or it released the microplastics. Just a second, please. Sorry for that. So just a question to you, and then I will just be back in a sec. Sorry for this. What is, for the food and beverage industry, a way to reduce its plastic? Because we have also a lot of these new materials, like you mentioned, algae, mycelium. We said, okay, packaging is relevant. What about the food industry? So how do they find their way? What is being tested right now? What are the alternatives? Is it, for example, cellulose-based products or solutions? What would you say on that? And I'll be back in a sec, so don't worry. I'll be back.
Yeah, cellulose is a big one. Exactly. So find different materials for the packaging industry. That would be one. And of course, what also needs to be stated is we currently have global supply chains, right? And this has also been the systems are very centralized, and we currently saw these problems during COVID when all of these global supply chains actually halted, right? So what's in and if we have these global supply chains, and if we have these centralized supply chains, basically the transportation routes are very, very long. And if you want to produce and if you want to transport all of these different food and beverages across the world, well, then you need something to package it, right? So what I'm advocating for is basically a return to regionalize production and consumption systems, right? So to localize food production, because you then don't need packaging, right? Because if you can produce food locally, the amount of packaging that you actually need for this transportation and for the storage and for these different things, this gets drastically lowered, right? So a re-regionalization approach of food production and consumption systems, a decentralization of food production systems, different vertical farming operations, for example, farming on vertical farming on houses, for example, or different other approaches that we currently see. Hydroponics would also be a very important one, where you basically have a circular system that basically can provide protein sources and also food and vegetables and fruits, for example. Um, so this is a thing that the underlying geometry that we have to focus on. So therefore, we can actually really reduce the amount of plastics that we actually need, right? Because the food that it gets distributed can be distributed in a time frame that you don't need packaging for, right? For example, fruits or something, right? So if you want to grow apples locally, for example, you don't need to package them, right? If you want to transport them over the whole entire globe, of course, you need to package them, right? You need to put chemicals most of the time in there to basically make them fresh when they get to the store, for example, if you have these globalized chains. So this is basically what I'm advocating for. This is also a part of the shared Green Deal and of the European Green Deal to make these grassroots movement and to localize the production systems, because it has multiple benefits, right? So not only can you reduce the amount of packaging that you need, but you can also reduce the amount of transport that you need, which also subsequently reduces the fuel that you need. Through this reduction of fuel that you actually need, you can also reduce emissions, right? Of course. Through localized production systems of food, you can basically reduce the amount of waste that is generated. Through the reduction of waste that is generated, you can also reduce highly harmful emissions like methane, for example, which are associated with biological flows, right? If you have these localized production systems, you can not only do that for packaging reductions, but you can also use that for food losses or for food waste reductions, right? So basically implement that into a biogas plant, for example, right? So if you have food waste, then you can basically use that for energy systems. So there are multiple benefits. So not only in terms of plastic reductions or packaging reductions, but also for transportation and logistics, fuel consumption, associated emissions, social cohesion that is improved through community-based initiatives for people, where there are community gardens, for example, and these things. So yeah, I think this is a important and very essential thing of the underlying business geometry and underlying economic systems that we want to achieve in the future. Now, of course, there's a little bit of backlash. We currently have international institutions, we have international companies that basically produce a lot of things and basically sell it into the whole entire globe. Yeah, but that doesn't change the fact that we are capable of growing our own food. Right? So, and we can do that without highly harmful chemicals, without the need for pesticides. We can compost more. We can grow these foods. We don't have to package it because we can sell it right away through localized selling structures. So it's a lot of good things that can come from it. And this is one thing on how we can actually reduce the packaging, right? So simply don't use it and then produce locally. So this is one important part. Of course, also you can reduce the amount of plastics that you're using. You can you can change the design of plastics if you really need it, right?
Mhm.
To basically make it in a way that it does not create microplastics, for example, or implement, for example, a take-back system. Implement circular supply loops where you have take-back systems in place, and basically, for example, pay the people to bring you your plastic back, right? So you can actually use this plastic packaging again, right? Because it's unheard of that we're using this plastic packaging once, right? And then it just becomes waste, right? I mean, it's a highly durable material. Why don't we implement these take back systems, even incentivize people for that, to bring that back, therefore creating these supply loops. But of course, we also need different liability structures for companies for that. Yeah, but in general, there's a lot that can be done and that will be done, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a thought-provoking discussion and exchange, and thank you for everybody watching. Thanks, Edward, for the shout out, for the comment. Also, thanks a lot, Ellen, for sharing, also reconfirming the experience on recycling being actually downcycling. Supporting the point and perspective what you mentioned. I mean, these are also statistics where you have data behind, so. It's also not something, where you present an opinion or a perspective, but it's just the experience that comes from, within the industry. So just to highlight that. And also, listening and a little bit also digesting what you just presented, I would definitely like to also highlight a few points before we go into the last three questions, and we're slightly over time. So let's, manage that. And so when we talk about the history, there was always this shift from decentralized to centralized to decentralized. Now we went through a long period of central solutions, central energy, central government, a lot of centralization of things. So the question is, maybe because we talk a lot about decentralized energy supply, we talk a lot about decentralized water treatment. Everybody should have clean your water on the side, whether it's a factory, and then discharge it clean into the rivers, and what you have the water management system in cities, and of course into the whole cycle. So what is it? Is it do you see also a similar type of trend, from centralization maybe into decentralization, decentralized food production, being independent, being autonomous in this sense? What is your take on that, Rafael?
The short answer is yes. That's what I actually meant.
Short.
Yeah. So when I talked about re-regionalization, I was talking about decentralized production and consumption systems. Decentralization and localization is a very fundamental principle for the future, where we can actually achieve to solve these problems. Of course, we're living in a centralized operating system. We currently see the problems that are associated with decentralization tactics and these control systems that we're currently need to adhere to, or that are currently being dismantled in a way. So there's really no stopping it, right? Because if we talk about a circular economy, and if we talk about a return to nature and to natural principles, and to really use nature as a guidance for our economy and how to deal with our structures and systems, there really is no central operator, right? Because those systems need to be resilient, and they are only resilient if they are decentralized, right? So the single point of failure risks that are associated with centralized systems are way higher than for decentralized systems, right? Because if, for example, in a decentralized electricity grid, one grid goes down, then the other system elements basically keep up that system, right? And so it's very resilient in terms of damages, for example. So this is also the case in, for example, forest or natural ecosystems, where there are very many decentralized production hubs, value hubs, where different materials and resources are cycled back and forth through feedback loops and all of these things. Yes, so the future is going to be decentralized, it's going to be distributed. This is not only the case in the economy, but also in the financial system. So yes, in my opinion, yes.
Interesting. Thanks a lot for sharing. Now, also, when I hear you talking, it's and also having the opportunity to exchange with other subject matter experts on various fields. We at Frogeex Business Network, a global business network of experts and solution providers for sustainable building and living. We talk a lot about the ecological context, the true connection to nature, the mimicking nature, where it's not anymore a kind of theoretical frame, but you kind of look at how is it implemented, what does it mean. And I think what you mentioned just really beautifully displays the complexity and also the simplicity of the solution. We know what the problem is. We know that it's very kind of grown into many elements. It's kind of very rooted in the system, and we have really problems to kind of change that, because it's somehow also very durable, very good usability, but it causes so many side effects that we are not able to handle at the scale that we are using it, with an acceleration rate and consumption increase. So
Great point. Great
I
points.
really find it, yeah, I really find it, thank you for from what you're saying, very interesting. And what I was and why I say complexity is because for me, when you say take big schemes, so you have a lot of elements and a lot of platforms and companies. I mean, it's like mushrooms popping up after rain now, and we are happy for that. Apparently everybody, it's just going to be a lot of dynamics on the market now that have these different formats where they take, for example, washing powder, or distribute washing powder in different containers. So this is all happening. The question is, when you still have it's also accepting the fact that it's a journey where we learn about all the impacts we are not yet aware about. You mentioned health impacts, the accumulation. How positive or negative is it going to be? We will see it in 1 year, 5 years, or 20 years on the generational kind of record. Will you see then what it cost? What was the health impact? So the question is, for me also, upgrading all the connected system and infrastructures behind. So when we talk about microplastics, capturing microplastics, removing microplastics from packaging, where you use, for example, washing powder as a female person, but I'm sure my male colleagues also use washing machines. Certainly you have this problem where it's still going to be released. It's in the washing powder itself, it's in the packaging itself, and it's released through the discharge of the washing machine. So you having the right filters in place for every. So that's the complexity of the system, where we need to start thinking, what do we need to take as steps to kind of really clean up the process, make sure if we use the material, we are aware what we are doing and we can take as much out as possible. Or we're gonna say, that's too much work, that's too much money that we're gonna spend on cleaning up the stuff. Maybe we just kind of ditch it, and find something else that is better. And that is be more natural. So that is also a point that I would like to highlight. You mentioned also sustainable materials, biodegradable materials, compostable, and we really love them for sure. And you have all these nature-based components. So the question which we always or the point that we always bring into the discussion is the element of the bearing capacity of Earth. So we know we are beyond that border, because we know that the ecosystem is already kind of giving up on itself, but we have a chance to kind of reignite the process to regenerate. So that is good. That is the good news. But also considering this, that many times people, now the reminders are popping up everywhere, that it's not only switching to the material that is biodegradable, but also thinking about the volume. How much volume is beneficial to us and to the system. So that was just some points. Really can echo the element just to mention around local collection of waste. Especially mentioned, we have Kenya on the call. We have Nigeria as a massive problem. They kind of the biggest landfills that you have, and really, like, when you see the numbers, it's like 30-50 meters high mountains of waste for generations, always on. So it's really an interesting element. What would be your solution for this, as also coming from the industry, as waste management, waste prevention, framing, helping also a little bit in the European Union, on projects, how to frame the approach in general. What would be your view on, how to eliminate such landfills? What would be the way forward for you? where we do see some options?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question, and I think it's a multidimensional question because there's not really an easy answer to that. Maybe I can give you a little bit of hints on how would I solve that, right? So you have the problem that a lot of waste is being produced, right? And also you have the problem that a lot of waste is not being collected, right? Now you can't say that if you're ramping up the recycling process or if you're ramping up the reverse logistics systems and the waste collection, then basically you can solve this problem. Well, then you have the problem of how much waste is actually going into the system, right? Because the waste is still being generated. So we need simultaneously a revamp of the current design choices in products and services to basically eliminate waste by design, make products, and also with regulations and the things eco design directive from the European Union, but also with the global initiatives that are currently on the way. We need products that are highly durable, to reuse them as many times as possible. They need to be repairable. They need to be built for longevity. They need to be built in a way that they don't contain highly harmful chemicals, for example. So the design is very, very important. If we're doing that, plus if we're ramping up our reverse logistics systems to basically close this loop first, and this is a very important thing, right? Because for the circular economy, you actually have to start at the end. So we need to start at the beginning with the design, but we also need to look at the end, right? Because the circular economy can only function if this cycle is being closed. If there are no reverse logistics systems in place, then we have a massive problems. And these reverse logistics systems, aka waste management systems, are lacking in many countries. That's a big problem. And what I would do is basically start with biological waste streams. So implement a reverse logistics systems for biological waste streams. Thereby you can reduce, for example, in the European Union, we know that biological waste streams actually make up 30 to 40% of the total solid waste generation, right? So just by implementing a reverse logistics systems or a reverse operations or collection of food waste, you can reduce the amount of waste by 40%. Of course, you can also reduce the amount of emissions that are associated. So these two things, you need to change them simultaneously to really reduce the amount of the system of waste that is coming in, and also to reduce the amount of waste that is coming out, and basically reintegrate that back into production. So those two things are very important. And of course, all the things in between, cleaning our production systems in terms of different energy sources, for example, hydrogen, which is a massive thing for the future. Biogas production, different sustainable business models or circular business models, sharing economy, where people can share their things. Of course, then for that, you'd also need the right design, right? Because if the thing breaks, you cannot really share it with one another, right? So the design is massively important. The European Union has also stated, this is not my opinion, but this is fact, that the environmental consequences or the environmental impact of a product can basically be reduced by 80% if the design is conducted in a way that is basically circular and sustainable, right? And also, of course, implementation of reverse logistics systems at the end to close this cycle, to basically have the foundation for a circular economy in the future. To start, I would say start with biological flows. Food waste is a massive problem. With the reintegration of food waste alone into production, you can not only reduce waste and emissions, you can provide food security through increased nutrients in soil. You can produce electricity. You can produce compost. You can use that to grow other things, right? For example, you can use biogas production or the food waste that you're using in biogas production. You can also use that for hydrogen production. So clean and green hydrogen production, right? So there are multiple benefits just from the implementation of a reverse logistics systems for biological flows alone. This is one key aspect I can not state enough. Yeah, so this is what I would do. So
we have two last questions. So we take Ellen. Thanks a lot, Ellen, for the question. We will take it in the end because I think it's a great closing question for the discussion today. So regarding cost, I mean, everybody talks, to business owners, this will happen, that regulation, this regulation. Now a business owner is sitting there, being hammered by all this super regulation, all these great ideas, maybe not knowledgeable about the full impacts, etc. fighting for their survival on the market as usual. So what is the message that you would like to share with business owners? How to manage this? Is it a cost constraint? What you see also from the work with your clients, is it something that is increasing costs, decreasing their costs, and what would you kind of give them as a kind of recommendation, as an advice?
Sure, great question. The cost structure is a big one because in the short term you're just going to ramp up costs because you need to invest in different structures, right? But the thing is that through the circular economy and through these environmental parameters, you can actually reduce costs. If you're doing research and development and, for example, different product design, you can actually reduce your waste disposal costs, right? If you're cleaning your production systems, for example, into renewables, you can actually reduce costs and emissions and basically fulfill your environmental performance. So cost reductions over the long term are possible. In the short term, of course, everything requires investments, right? So if you want to do shifts, if you want to change these structures, you basically have to use a little bit of money, but I would say it's doable, right? Because you can do a lot of things that are not that capital intensive, I would say, to basically, for example, use alternatives for the same product that maybe cost the same, right? But that are enable you to basically also reduce your disposal costs. So reduce costs for waste disposal is in the long term feasible. Reduce costs for the resource use is going to occur. Reduce costs for your primary raw materials because, for example, you can work with other people who might be using that waste and use their waste, right? So, for example, I worked with a company basically in Ethiopia. They are collecting used coffee grounds, right? So that's Coffee Resurrect. Basically, is a great company. They are collecting used coffee grounds in Ethiopia, and basically from restaurants. They're basically collecting these biological flows. They reintegrate them into their production. They reduce their costs for primary raw materials because they're substituting that with waste or secondary raw materials. And of course, the other system has reduced disposal costs, right? So try if you can see where you have win-win situations. Use platforms where people might want to give away their things, for example. So there are multiple things that the people can do. Of course, some amount of money with everything, some amount of investment is required. But over the long term, I think the economics work out. They clearly do, but it's longer term time frame. Let's say.
What if, for example, just to add to your point, then we go to the final question, which, if we can, let's cover that, as we kind of gave much of the bonus information for everybody watching this and dealing with the topic. So hope you enjoy that and it brings you value. Regarding the last question, because now I kind of got off track. Is it possible, from Ellen, is it possible to stop using plastic as the final and ultimate solution? Can we close the system?
To turn off the tap of plastics or to close the circularity of plastics. That I think
right. I believe that's what Ellen asking about. A great question.
To turn off the tap on plastic production. I hope so in the future. It's going to be a long way and it's going to be a very hard one to do. There are a lot of structures and a lot of vested interests. They're not easily going to have that. There is a lot of movement currently working on this. I envision a planet where there basically is no need for plastics. Yes.
Interesting, definitely. So thank you so much, Rafael, for your time.
Thank you. And just on the last note, I just wanted to bring that point home to really not see recycling as a circular economy principle that is very, very good. So please see that as the last thing that we actually want to achieve in the circular economy. So be critical for the companies that tell you, well, we're in the recycling process, and if they want to shift their responsibility to waste management systems and recycling infrastructures, be critical of that. They're transferring their liability, they're transferring their accountability to someone else. This is also called circular washing. And yeah, just wanted to bring that point home that recycling is not synonymous for the circular economy. We really want to achieve very, very different things in terms of different design choices, different materials that we want to use to basically perform a true circulation of materials and not, and not greenwash with recycling buzzwords. Okay, so I just wanted to bring that point home. Thank you.
Wonderful point and great summary. And also, there are many options in terms of financing where, banks, insurances, everybody has their own requirements now to provide a concrete strategy. How do they support businesses? So eventually also an option over there to kind of, tap into the resources and get financing for the transition and innovating your product or production side. So with this, thank you so much, Rafael, for your time today. It was a wonderful discussion as always.
Thank you very much as well.
Always
have
a
a
pleasure.
great one. Yes, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much and have a great one.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.